Hello, Stephen Moss. Welcome to Bird Brain, a podcast where we apply laser focus to a bird in popular culture and discuss whether its characteristics as represented in either books or films are actually accurate to the species itself in nature. So I've picked you because you are the bird man. And I
That's
say
very kind of you.
well, I have first-hand experience of your incredible bird brain because of being a student of yours when you were teaching the MA in Travel and Nature Writing at Bath Spa. So thank you for being here today. Other people won't be as well acquainted with you as I am. Can you give them a little insight into your career in nature?
Well, I'm one of those very lucky people, Kelly, who turned my hobby into my job. It took me quite a while. I was in my mid to late 30s when I did this. I'd always been a bird watcher, as we used to call them, or birder, as we're now called, and had got more interested in natural history generally. And I ended up working at the BBC and ended up making natural history programmes there, and also writing books about nature, which is what we'll talk about today. I also lead bird tours, and then later, 8 years ago, I got the job, as you say, as course leader of the MA, which was an absolute delight. But that chapter in my life is also now coming to an end, as I have new adventures to do, mostly connected with birds.
Now, because I am a little bit nerdy, even if it is not always in the world of birds, I have done a little bit of research on you, which is always weird when it's someone you know. And I found out that you have actually visited every continent?
Yes, all 7 continents. I was sent by the BBC to 6 of them, so that was handy, wasn't it? North America, I filmed over in California and Cape May. Africa, I did Big Cat Diary many years ago. And they also sent me to Antarctica about 20 years ago to do a really wild show. So that was great fun.
Would you go back?
I'd go back to any of these places. Antarctica, I don't know. It's an awfully long way, but it was the most incredible experience.
Now you are ending this chapter as a lecturer. Is there something on your wish list for nature?
I'd love to go to the Pantanal in Brazil. I love wetlands, and Kakadu in northern Australia. It's about the birds. It's about seeing new species. I love doing that. But it's also about the places you go. It's about the people you meet, both the people who live there, particularly guides who take you out, and people who are hosting you in a foreign country, but also the people you meet who are also birders or travellers or naturalists. So I just love that. I've just come back from Ecuador and it was the most amazing experience, hummingbirds everywhere. But again, it was the people I met, the farmers who had turned their land over, rewilded it, reforested it, and were now encouraging people to come and visit. That was a really humbling experience and really exciting, as well as seeing some amazing birds.
Maybe when we're younger, what we're most excited about is the being acquainted with something for the first time. You know, your first sight of something, getting the right picture of something, or getting really close to something. And the more that we actually grow to become attached to the natural world, and the more we learn about things, and the fact that the environmental crisis is unavoidably omnipresent now, do you think it's changing the way that we engage with nature? Because it's really fascinating that you're mentioning the people that are working on rewilding, the people that are working on protection, the innovations that are allowing nature to maybe have a better chance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, funnily enough, I was watching the other night, completely out of the blue, on iPlayer. Rosie the dog is coming down the very noisy stairs. Rosie's a red fox Labrador and she's very noisy. Right, go up on the sofa, you'll be fine. Good. Right, we're back. I was watching Liz Bonin doing her series Wild Caribbean, and I know it's not very fashionable to say this, but I get really bored with wildlife films. I get intensely bored because what they are is, here's another animal, and it's being chased by another animal that's either going to kill it or it's going to escape. And it's just very, very dull. And Liz Bonin did the most fantastic programme at about a 50th probably the budget of Planet Earth, much more engaging, much more entertaining, where she saw some wildlife, but mostly she was talking to people who were saving the river dolphins in Venezuela, or in Trinidad or whatever. So yeah, that was a real delight. And I think when I go to places now, I feel that. That's what I want to do. I want to meet people. I mean, everywhere I go, you have a local guide normally. Sometimes you also have an American or British guide. But the local guides give you not just fantastic views of the birds and the wildlife, but they also give you an insight into what life is like in these countries. Natural history, nature is a very holistic experience. I know you come more from the travel writing end. And again, when I was teaching on the course, meeting travel writers, working with our colleague Gail Simmons, who's a wonderful writer of place. She prefers writer of place than travel writer, and I get what she's meaning, really, because she writes about the place and the people.
Yeah.
And for me, there's a sort of holy trinity of places, people and wildlife.
I'm actually currently reading The Innocents Abroad by Mark Twain.
Oh, really?
Yes. I've been meaning to read Mark Twain for years, and I've never got around to it. And it's interesting because it is this big journey that he's on this ship and experiencing the world. And it really has made me think this is why he's so highly regarded, though. Because even though some of his references to people haven't stood the test of time well,
yes,
like with anything,
yeah,
it isn't as jarring because there's also so much generosity of spirit in the way he writes about place, because there is still a lot of kindness and openness and awe to difference. And I really love that about the writing. And to segue this to today's world of Harry Potter, it might sound tenuous, but to me, it isn't, because I think that the world of fantasy was my first love in literature. I've always been aware that part of the charm beyond the characters was the immersion in nature that books like The Faraway Tree and the His Dark Materials trilogy offered me. It didn't feel like I was in a bedroom of a house in a city when I read those books. My potential future felt so much more expansive once I was acquainted to the descriptions of the Enchanted Wood or the plains of Svalbard where the aurora borealis danced overhead. Part of the reason my love of these stories is so enduring is because the authors recognise that truth can be stranger than fiction, or at least it can be just as engrossing. For example, I love it that in the Harry Potter series, J.K. Rowling is tipping her hat at folklore and mythology, and she includes real-life natural ingredients in some of her potions. She references the use of mandrake roots and wolfsbane, valerian, and I really like it that she even mentions wormwood, which is mentioned a couple of times in different potions, but most significantly in the polyjuice potion. And if you're not acquainted, that is a potion that can transform you into somebody else. And wormwood is one of the ingredients used. She could have just made them up, but instead she has leaned into the history of us looking to nature to solve our problems and to make us well.
Yes, yeah. And place is very important in all those books, isn't it? I mean, a book I love from my childhood is Wind in the Willows, and I've read it to my children.
Beautiful book.
And it's a very odd book because it's really about, Mole and Ratty and Badger are Edwardian gentlemen.
Yeah.
And it's a very strange society. There's no women in it. But, it has stood the test of time. And I think books like that last. And the classics you've mentioned and Harry Potter will last because they do contain a truth. And we used to talk a lot on our course about the difference between truth and accuracy. If your writing is always accurate, it may still be rather dull and not very truthful. It's got to be accurate in the sense that it mustn't be inaccurate, but truth is bigger than that.
Right, Stephen, it is time to put your ornithological chops to the test against my knowledge of Harry Potter. And in this case, the topic of this episode. And that is Hedwig, the snowy owl who features in this series. So, I'm going to start off with a bold statement. I interpret the role of Hedwig to be that of a motif in the Harry Potter series, because I see her as a symbol of Harry's connection to the wizarding world. And I say that because Hedwig is given to Harry before he goes to Hogwarts, and Harry is often isolated from the wizarding world and the magical community because he's sent to be with muggles in the school holidays. And the only connection he has in those gaps is Hedwig.
Yes. Yeah. Well, owls and, of course, birds generally have a massive connection to mythology. And when I say mythology, I don't just mean, or I do mean things from the ancient world and early civilizations. That mythology continues now. So, for example, ravens in Game of Thrones. Bit of a spoiler here. In Game of Thrones, if you haven't read it or seen it, everyone dies horribly except the ravens. And the ravens see the past, present and future, which George R.R. Martin confesses, rightly, and there's nothing wrong with this, that he took from Norse mythology. Odin the god has two ravens who can moon in, and they fly around the world every day and come back and sit on his shoulder and tell him what's going on. So ravens have an insight into the world. Birds have an insight into the world. They see it differently from us. They can fly, they can travel, they can do lots of things that until very recently we couldn't do. And, you know, owls are part of that mythology. Owls are, as a group, are probably the most mythologized birds. Not exclusively, but it tends to be, I suppose, because we know about this, the Northern Hemisphere. The mythology is from the First Nations of America, the Siberian peoples, Scandinavia, you know, the Celtic mythologies as well, you know, right the way across. And, of course, civilizations like the ancient Romans and ancient Greeks. Owls are very, very important. One of our owls, the little owl, is named after the goddess Athene. Its Latin name, its scientific name is Athene noctua, and was Athene's owl. You know, Athene's sort of, I suppose, what's the word that Philip Pullman used? Yes, familiar. Yes.
Or demon.
Demon or familiar creatures. Yeah. So owls have always been there. Now, I don't know why. I've watched some of the Harry Potter films. I've read the old books. You know, I don't know why J.K. Rowling picked the owl. As I do say in my book, if she'd wanted something to send messages, a pigeon or a raven would have been a lot better. Owls, bless them, aren't... to say they're not as intelligent, that's a bit unfair. Ravens, in particular, corvids, and oddly pigeons, which we often call bird-brained, are incredibly intelligent. And of course, pigeons famously have this ability to find their way home. Lots of birds have that, but pigeons have it to a particular honed degree because we have bred them over time to do this.
I found in my research for this, actually, because one of my questions, and you've led us on to it, is why would you bother using owls to deliver the post? Because it's all called owl post, and I'll let you answer this. But in my research around this, what I found interesting is the homing pigeon, right? That idea of the pigeon always goes home. There is a strange little link between Harry Potter here, a very tenuous one, but this is my job to find the links between the characters. In Harry Potter, do you know what the night bus is?
I don't.
Right, so the night bus is a massive double-decker bus. So, you know, like the old school London buses, except I'm pretty sure it's purple. Now, the night bus has the magical ability to just appear when a wizard or witch is in danger. It appears when they need to go somewhere and they're unable to use magic. The night bus appears,
That's
on you
lovely,
go.
isn't it? Because the night bus is what got you home in London.
Exactly,
when you were
exactly.
stranded.
And it's a really sweet idea. And what's nice about the night bus is that we see it through Harry's eyes. And like him, when it first appears, we've got no idea why it's there and if it's there for nefarious purposes, because he's in a bit of a crisis point and it appears. And when he gets on, there's the added bonus of the lovely, lovely visual of, you know, brass beds on there with people relaxing because they're going to be on there for ages. And then the night bus makes you feel sick as a dog because it's dodging through all the traffic and the muggles can't see it. It's squashing itself between things. But it's a double-decker bus.
Sounds like a real bus.
I know. And the reason I bring it up is because in my research about homing pigeons, I found out that in the war, when they wanted to use homing pigeons to take messages, they actually made a loft for them in London double-decker buses.
Oh, how lovely.
And
I
they
didn't know.
parked them behind the trenches.
Yes.
They did.
Yeah.
And they moved them around. And the reason that it stuck in my mind because of the visual image, but also the fact that they had to obviously test out whether the pigeons were going to be able to find their way about if they moved their home. Because as soon as you obviously start putting their home on a bus and then moving the bus around, and obviously the answer was they found out that they could. And they never really understood why. They speculated at the time it was to do with their magnetic ability to understand the way of the Earth's magnetism. It's a very strange thought. But
Yeah, that's how they find their way. They use magnetism. They use lots of cues. Migratory birds generally. They use polarized light during the day. They use the stars and the moon. They use the Earth's magnetic field is probably the most important. And as they get closer, they use landmarks. And they've discovered recently that some pigeons were flying following trunk roads when they were flying back when they were near their home. So they were actually going on a slightly longer route, rather like a driver would say, you know what, I don't want to go down those country lanes because I might get lost, even with the sat-nav. I'm going to go along the main road because it's probably going to be less stressful, even though it's slightly further. But yeah, pigeons were used in the war a huge amount. I've written about this in a book called 10 Birds That Changed the World, and pigeon is chapter 2, and it's all about, that chapter's nearly all about communication during wartime, using pigeons. So why J.K. Rowling used it? I mean, she used it now because they look amazing. I've only ever seen one snowy owl in my life in the wild. I've seen them obviously in, you get them, don't you, in falconry centres and birds of prey centres and things. But I saw one 41 years ago. I went up to Shetland just after I left university, and I went to the island of Fetla, and I walked across Fetla, which is known as the Green Island there. It's very beautiful, and saw one of the last remaining snowy owls that were sort of semi-resident in Britain. They'd bred on Fetla until the mid-70s. This was by then the early 80s. The male had died and one of the females was still there. And so I saw her. So I think, maybe, and they are a magical bird. I mean, almost literally, but, owls have real character. Why do owls have character? Well, the fundamental two reasons. One is they look at you. Almost all other birds, their eyes are at the side of the head. Some birds of prey, like eagles, their eyes are sort of semi-forward facing, but owls really look like they're just looking straight back at you. They look very human. Very few birds have that quality. And of course the other quality of owls is they are largely, although far from exclusively, nocturnal. And so the mystery of owls fits with that whole nocturnal thing, in that we owls are everywhere, but we very rarely see them.
yes,
And that's how I opened the book. I opened the book with 7 encounters of the 7 owls I feature in the book, including that one in Shetland, all of which are incredibly memorable moments with an owl. Most birds don't have that. Most birds, except very rare ones, you see a lot, and they're still lovely. I mean, seeing a kingfisher is wonderful, but I've seen a lot more kingfishers than owls, I think, probably over the years. So you hear owls, of course, that's the other difference. Sound is a very important aspect to our lives, very neglected in nature writing, actually. And, of course, you mostly tell owls by their call.
yes. And I wonder if we leave it out in nature writing, if humans are just too self-conscious to try and describe a sound.
Well, that's an interesting point. Yeah, I think that may well be true.
Never.
Because we're not very good at it.
Yeah, and I would never, around a bird, I don't think I'm a self-conscious person, but I would be very embarrassed around a birder or an ornithologist to try and impersonate a sound, because I would think, oh, do I actually understand that subtle difference between an E or a
Yes.
chi?
Well, also,
and I would want to.
Birds sing using 2... We have vocal cords and we have a larynx. They have a syrinx, which is divided in 2, so they can do 2 notes at a time. So there are people who can impersonate birds, and they do it very well, but generally we're pretty hopeless at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think you're right. And I think it can be a bit self-conscious to write about the sound of a bird. Owls, people tend to say hooting. Well, tawny owls, male tawny owls hoot, and several other owls hoot, but generally hooting isn't a very good description, really.
And maybe that's the other thing. We're fearful that if we do commit something to paper, other people will be saying it forever and it's actually inaccurate, and that'd be our fault. So to bring us back to Hedwig, as you mentioned, Hedwig is a snowy owl. Now, Hogwarts itself is meant to be in Scotland. J.K. Rowling always says that's where she imagined it.
Yes.
If so, it would be in the Highlands. Now, you always get to see it because the Hogwarts Express, is driving up and you get this beautiful view of the mountains. Now, it's nestled between two mountains, and it's speculated that those mountains are Ben Nevis and maybe... Oh, I don't know how to pronounce this. Thank you, Ben McDewey.
Well, I've probably got that wrong. Very interesting. You told me that when you emailed me the other day. I didn't know that because I'm not a huge Harry Potter obsessive like you, and many other people.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, if you wanted to see a snowy owl in Britain now, if you walked up Ben McDewey in winter, you'd have a chance in that every few years... I mean, snowy owls still turn up in Britain. They turn up from the Arctic, that's where they live. They are a sort of regular vagrant, if you like, or a scarce migrant. And they've turned up on places like the Isles of Scilly, of all places. But they've also, they tend to be St Kilda, the Hebrides, and Ben McDewey, Ben Nevis, Cairngorms area, because, that's their habitat. So... they have certainly been seen on Ben McDewey, and maybe that's why she chose. I didn't realise Hogwarts was up there. I thought it was in King's Cross. No, that's the station.
Station, well done.
That's on the way. So maybe that was her reason. Because the other thing about Hedwig is you've mentioned that she's a she, but unfortunately in the films they couldn't use a she. Now, the reason is that female owls, like most birds of prey, the female is often substantially larger than the male. And that is true of snowy owls. And I think they thought that the young Daniel Radcliffe might have his hands ripped to shreds by the talons of a female owl, whereas a male would be a bit easier to handle. The reason you can tell the difference is female snowy owls are white with quite a lot of black speckling. It varies, black or almost very dark brown on their plumage. Whereas male snowy owls are not quite pure white, but they're much whiter and smaller.
Okay.
So the one I saw, I remember, was a female, but I would absolutely love, I'd love to go to the Arctic and see snowy owls in their sort of natural habitat.
So we know that snowy owls could potentially be found at this location, so we'll give J.K. Rowling some bonus points there. Would a snowy owl be happy in that sort of environment? And another question on the Hogwarts setting itself. So you're not as familiar as I am, but there is an owlery at Hogwarts, and so the idea is live in the owlery and then she would go off and deliver messages or bring messages. Would Hedwig be happy if she was in Scotland near these mountains? And would she enjoy resting in an owlery?
Snowy owls are a nomadic bird in that, particularly the young ones, when they are hatched up in the Arctic, and then they go very long distances, and some of them turn up in Scotland and some in Scandinavia, and in America they'll go very far south sometimes. They'll go a very long way, and then they will, of course, after the winter they would go back. They would normally head back to the north. So if a wild owl was at Hogwarts, it would then migrate back. The difference is owls are often kept in captivity, and the reason is they can be bred in captivity. They're pretty successful at that. And if you breed a bird in captivity and you keep it well in it sounds like the owlery is quite a large, it's not a tiny little cage, it's an area where it can fly, it can move around, then that's, not considered cruel, it's not an issue. And I would have thought Hedwig, given that it can deliver messages and things, it would have been born and raised in captivity. So actually, you couldn't really release it into the wild very easily. And so, yes, it would stay put, and I think it would be happy. in that. Barn owls are often kept as pets. Eagle owls are. Owls are pretty common. We talk about birds of prey, and we often think birds of prey are only what we call diurnal birds of prey. So hawks, eagles, buzzards, falcons, which aren't related to the others at all. But owls are part of that. They are a bird of prey, or a raptor, we might say. But so yeah, they're all relatively easy to breed and keep in captivity.
And how would Hedwig get along with other types of owls that were there? Is there any hierarchy in owls, or as soon as you have a bird raised in captivity, does all that go out the window?
That's a very good question. I'm not an expert on captive birds. I've never kept birds. Generally, they do behave differently in captivity. Birds are very territorial, and if they have a territory, they will absolutely attack other birds, either to eat them or to drive them out of their territory. On Shetland, for example, when the snowy owls did nest up there, did breed up there, there were short-eared owls around and things like that as well, or other owls might come through, and yes, they would chase them off just as they'd chase off, any other birds of prey or gulls or whatever. So I think most owls are considered quite easy to keep in captivity. And certainly you see snowy owls sometimes. They're rarer than things like barn owls. So yeah, I think they would generally be okay.
Okay. So with Hedwig, she is there as Harry's pet. Every pupil at Hogwarts is allowed to take a pet with them. Rowling herself never uses the word familiar, so she doesn't describe them like that at all. But other people refer to them as this because essentially it is what we recognise from other stories, and the creature somehow does seem to support them in their progress into magic and their maturity. Now, would a familiar that is an owl be a good choice? Because historically, a lot of people, as you referenced earlier, have associated owls with magic and mystery.
Yes, I think mythology is interesting because what I learnt when I wrote these bird biographies, which the owl is the 5th volume in the series, so I've done robin, wren, swallow, swan and owl. And the owl, you get 7 for the price of 1 in the owl, because I write about all 7 British species, which for the pedants listening is tawny owl, barn owl, little owl, long-eared owl and short-eared owl, which I put together, snowy owl and eagle owl, which do breed in Britain in very small numbers, probably escaped birds. It's all a bit controversial, so I look at that. What I learnt, and this happened when I wrote the Robin book, I thought that I would be writing, as I did, about the bird's behaviour. So like with owls, I write about what they do, how they hunt, how they see, what adaptations they have, what you'd call the science, the biology, the ecology of owls. And I also write about their cultural importance, including Harry Potter's in there, but many other references, ancient and modern. When I was writing the Robin book, it dawned on me, and I've tested this out on all the other books since, that when there is a cultural belief about a bird, it emanates, it has its roots in the bird's genuine behaviour.
Lovely.
And it's really interesting. Robins are linked with Christmas because they feed on the ground. When it used to snow at Christmas, they were hungry. So unlike other birds that could find food, they would come to the back door and they would fluff themselves up and look cute. They weren't cute. They were hungry and, on the verge of death. So you fluff up your feathers to stay warm, and people would feed them so they became tame. They would come to you when you're digging in the garden, because we don't have wild boars in Britain, or didn't at that stage. And robins evolved to follow wild boars. Wild boars dig up the earth, and the robin drops down and grabs earthworms and beetles. So it does that with gardeners. So people have this real affection for the robin. The robin is also quite a territorial and quite violent bird for a small bird. Now, we shouldn't, like with any of these birds, we should never impose our moral judgments on it. Just because robins are more aggressive than other birds doesn't make them nasty. But it's interesting that a bird that is so aggressive and territorial is the bird that became Britain's favourite bird.
Yeah.
And same with owls. Owls are mysterious. I mean, not everyone likes owls. People are frightened of owls because they're associated with ghosts, particularly barn owls, because they're white and they used to live in ancient buildings, and they'd screech and they would sound like a lost soul.
Yeah.
And they're pretty scary. My son George, who's now a strapping 18-year-old, but when he was about 10, he confessed to me that because we have tawny owls here and they hoot outside his room, the males, and the females call the kiwik sound, to-it sound, if you like. And he was dead scared of owls. He found owls really frightening. I think he's outgrown that now.
Yeah.
But, we don't all... It's not right to say it's a love-hate relationship, but it's more ambivalent than with many birds. Robins, really, people just love them because they're cute.
Yeah, and I guess they're small. And so the idea of... It's a bird with quite murderous intent. I actually think it's something I remember from when I first met you. People were talking about the affection of the robin, and I think somebody else in our cohort quite flippantly said, "Oh, yeah, everyone loves the robin, but the number one killer of robins is other robins."
Oh, that's a good line. Yes, yeah.
And it's a great
not
line.
quite the number one killer, but yes, they do. They do kill each other occasionally. Males will occasionally kill each other. It's pretty rare, actually, but most birds don't do that.
Yeah. Whereas
Swans do, funnily enough.
Oh,
Swans
really?
another bird which I wrote about, which we have a very ambivalent relationship with, partly because we don't think it's a bird, because it's a big white thing that doesn't fly away when we go near it.
Oh, and everyone wants to talk about how it will break your arm.
Yeah, break a man's arm, yes. That's in the book as well.
People are obsessed. So I'm thinking Hedwig happens to be female. Would it matter if, in terms of doing its duty as a deliverer of post, would either of the genders be better suited to that or not at all?
I don't think owls are very suited to delivering messages, actually. But, George Martin uses ravens in Game of Thrones and they deliver messages. Again, they're playing on mythology. I'm sure there are myths in the past. I'm sure J.K. Rowling has read genuine ancient myths about owls that they deliver messages. What owls certainly do is they are seen as delivering not a literal message, but a metaphorical message. So owls would appear over Roman battles during the day. Now, as soon as an owl appears during the day, something's wrong. And typically the Romans, if they lost the battle, they would say, there was the owl appeared and it was a what's the word?
An omen.
An omen, thank you. It was an omen. But of course, sometimes they won the battle and someone had seen an owl or reported owls or whatever. But we do use these mythologies very much to sort of, to our own use, if you like. Now, owls, because owls aren't generally seen in the day, I mean, barn owls often are in the middle of the day, particularly if it's been very wet, they'll hunt in the middle of the day when it dries out because they have to, because they're hungry. Little owls are pretty diurnal. Short-eared owls, very much so. Long-eared owls, not at all. And tawny owls, really not at all. Occasionally see one roosting in the daytime, being attacked, actually, by smaller birds. Owls have got this mystery to them, and so there are a lot of omens about owls in history, which are in the book.
Owl post at Hogwarts is always delivered over breakfast.
Yeah.
So which owls would be best suited to that role? If they were going to be having to be dropping things off at breakfast, which ones are going to be less disgruntled by this?
I'd argue probably barn owl, because barn owls are what birders use a lot of lovely words, and one of the words they use is crepuscular, which comes from the French crépuscule, meaning twilight, and crepuscular is active mainly at dawn and dusk. And barn owls do hunt during the night, and they hunt occasionally during the day. But if you want to see barn owls, you go out particularly late in the evening, an hour or so before dusk, and sometimes early in the morning. So maybe yes, the barn owl will probably be the one that you'd use for that.
Okay. That is a good point. How would the snowy owl feel about being up and dropping things off at
The
breakfast?
snowy owls aren't at all nocturnal, partly because you have to bear in mind with the snowy owl that if it lives in the Arctic for 3 months of the year, more or less, it's almost entirely light where it lives. If it lives beyond the Arctic Circle, from, obviously around the summer equinox in summer solstice, in towards the end of June, but really from sort of early May through to August, it's going to be pretty light up there all the time. Even on Shetland, when I went up in June, July before, and you get about 3 hours of sort of what they call it the simmer dim, the summer dim. It's not even darkness.
Yeah.
You still see the light in the sky, and Shetland's below the Arctic Circle, so you don't get 24 hours of daylight. But generally, in summer, snowy owls are within the Arctic Circle, so they're a very diurnal creature.
So she's not going to be too disgruntled. No. So the other thing I was thinking about in that, I read about the plight of snowy owls in your book, and I actually wasn't very familiar with the topic. So something I read about that I was totally ignorant of is the fact that because they're quite low flying birds, that's something that they tend to find can actually pose them problems in modern life, because they are finding cables and
cars,
vehicles to be in the way. Yeah. So if we take this to the world of Potter, would delivering packages be suited to other types of birds that fly at a different kind of range?
Yeah. Well, again, pigeons. Pigeons delivered packages. In the French siege of Paris back in the 60s or 70s, they put microfilm on the legs of pigeons and sent messages out, and they had thousands of messages carried by a single pigeon. You think microfilm surely wasn't invented then, but it was.
And are they flying very high with those messages?
Not very high, no. Pigeons generally fly. You see them, don't you? They're, I don't know, 50, 100 feet up. But generally, owls, particularly when they're hunting, because owls use their hearing to hunt, particularly barn owls, but also snowy owls, great grey owls, things like that, particularly birds hunting in snow, they have to use their hearing. So they have very soft feathers, which is why they don't like going out in the rain, because they get soaked. And those feathers have evolved so that they can hunt and listen to voles or lemmings, in the case of snowy owls and things like that, on the ground. They can hear it scratching, sometimes within some kind of vegetation or snow. Barn owls get killed a lot by vehicles because they're very low flying hunters. Tawny owls hunt in woods. Tawny owls generally don't, although a few years ago my wife Suzanne was out, walked out of where we are now to walk down to the shop in the village, and came back within about a minute, and I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "Look what I've just found." And she'd found a dead tawny owl that had clearly been hit by a car right by the corner of the road. And it must have been very unlucky, because generally tawny owls aren't flying around roads in a way that barn owls often are. Barn owls will hunt across fields, and they will of course fly across a road, bang. So barn owls are particularly sensitive to it. But it was a beautiful, absolutely stunning bird.
Oh, it's so sad. Right, moving on to its actual characteristics. There are times when Hedwig seems to mirror Harry's emotions. So I know you haven't watched them greatly, but he becomes quite sullen and withdrawn. This obviously...
He's a teenager.
He's a teenager, and he's constantly having to save the world. And, everyone around him is murdered. I'd be pretty moody as well. Hedwig seems to pick up on Harry's emotions. And in fact, she sometimes mirrors them. Is there any truth to the idea that an owl might be particularly empathic?
I don't think so, no. I think the interesting thing about birds generally is we impose all these both anthropomorphic things. We think they're behaving in a human way, and that's true when we say, male mallards will rape a female. Mm-hmm. Well, they're not, literally, because obviously rape is a heinous crime. It's part of their instinct and evolution. Likewise, robins are friendly. No, they're not. They just want your food. A good example, which I write about at the beginning of my book, 10 Birds That Changed the World, I start with the raven, because the raven has extraordinary mythology. It's the, of an individual species, it has the most extraordinary myths about them. And I start with the story of a woman who is, I think she's chopping wood or she's clearing up in her garden, in her backyard in Colorado on a winter's day, and she hears this raven, and she knows ravens, and it's flying around, it's going "arr, arr" to her all the time, "arr," incredible sound they make, very deep. And she thinks it's really weird, and it is. It's not behaving normally.
Mm-hmm.
She then looks up and sort of shakes her fist at it, at which point she sees 20 feet away, just below where the raven's perched on a rock, she sees a cougar.
Oh.
A predator, and the predator is about to jump on her, and it will kill her because she's a small woman.
It's warning her.
Well, that's what she says. So she screams. Her husband runs out. The cougar runs away. The raven flies around and goes "arr, arr," and disappears. And she told this is before the days of social media. It's back in the 90s. She tells the local newspaper that the bird has saved her. And she has very strong Christian beliefs. She says, this bird came and saved me. I owe my life to that raven.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, having told that story as I do in the book, what's really happening?
Okay. Has it got a nest? Do you think it's
No. No. Why is it calling when this... I mean, the obvious answer, and you've said it, and she said it, is that it's warning her, possibly, maybe, I don't know, to get a reward.
Okay.
Except it isn't.
No.
It's telling the cougar where the food is.
No.
Because what ravens used to do was they would follow prehistoric hunters, and they would follow wolves, and they would follow cougars, and they follow any large
Stephen,
predator
no.
that can kill an animal like a deer.
No, I know what you're going to say now.
And then, of course, the cougar or the wolf or the human will eat the animal, but they will leave some for the raven.
No.
Now, what's the advantage to a wolf or a cougar or a human? Well, it's very obvious. Ravens can fly. And because they can fly, they can cover an area and go, oh, hang on, there's a sick deer here.
Yeah.
So she was the equivalent of a young sick deer. She was a very small woman, and the cougar would have killed her, probably. Certainly it would have injured her.
And the raven would have eaten the entrails.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's great, isn't it?
I prefer
Now,
the other version.
All right, but what this says, and your questions about, I mean, I know they're quite tongue-in-cheek, but your questions about the snowy owl are relevant to this because, yes, you can train birds to do things for humans. Pigeons are, and in theory, you could train owls to carry messages. You probably could do that. But that's not their instinct. Their instinct is to look for themselves. They're not thinking about us. They're thinking about us if we can give them food.
So it would be conditioning.
I say in the Robin book, my friend Hugh Warwick, who you might know is a wonderful writer about hedgehogs and various other things, a lovely man. And Hugh told a story, which I asked permission to put in my book about the robin, where he trained, he's very much more patient than me, so he hand-trained a robin to come to his hand for mealworms. It takes about 3 days. And robins, because they are quite tame and used to people, they will do it. If you put a lot of effort in, which I can't be bothered to do. Anyway, he was feeding the robin, and one day he was nodding off one afternoon, sitting, I think he's got a little out room or conservatory or terrace or whatever, and he suddenly woke up and realised the robin was sort of just hopping around him, going, where's the food then? So he went in the kitchen, got some cheese, brought it out and gave it to the robin. And then he said, I realised at that point that it was not so much that I had trained the robin, but the robin had trained me. And I just thought that was lovely because he sums up the whole point. We think, oh, isn't that cute? Is that clever of the bird? Whatever. But it is clever of the bird. But the bird is going, you're giving me food. You're not a threat. That's fine by me. Where's my blooming food?
But it doesn't necessarily make a relationship.
No.
It's transactional,
no.
right?
Although we know, we've sat here with Rosie, the red fox Labrador, and we know that pets, particularly dogs, but also cats and other pets, they look pleased to see us. They make us feel better. There is a definite relationship, which I've only discovered. I had a dog when I was a child, but I'd sort of forgotten until we got Rosie a few years ago how odd that relationship is. So if you can do it with a dog, maybe you can do it with an owl.
I'm going to spoil this for you. Do you know what happens to Hedwig?
No.
Okay. So
Am I going to get upset?
you're probably not. Cole's hard heart there. Hedwig is given to Harry at the start before he goes to Hogwarts. And
But
then,
I've got to be a cold trait.
yes, well done, as Hagrid. And Hedwig is his loyal companion. And more importantly, he has Hedwig when he's not in the magical world. So when he goes home in the holidays, he's constantly at the Dursleys, and it's a miserable experience. You know, the cupboard under the
I remember
stairs.
that. Yeah, I read the first book.
And all that jazz.
Yeah.
To be fair, it's the worst one.
Yeah.
If I had not had a younger brother, and my brother's 7 years younger than me, so my brother is just the right age to have read them, and I'm that little bit older. He was obsessed with them. Now, he's not a reader. Unlike me, he was never as interested in stories.
Yeah.
And he was obsessed with Harry Potter. And I happened to read him, I think the second or the third one had come out.
Yes.
We were on holiday. I said to Mum and Dad, oh, it's okay, you can go and do whatever. And I read him. And I immediately, became a huge fan. But it was so disappointing to actually read the first one for the first time, because I thought, it's lucky that I ever picked up the others, because the first one is very simplistic. And don't get me wrong, she's writing for a younger audience at that time, and the audience grows with her.
Yes, of course.
I love the books, but I will say that first one's not.
How interesting.
It's a lovely foundation for the characters.
Now I have a grandson.
Are way more enjoyable.
Now I have a grandson. Sammy's only just one. But when he's old enough, I will read him
Yeah,
Harry Potters.
I vouch for them.
Daisy, my daughter, who's 18, she watches the films obsessively.
Yeah, and interestingly, actually, you can see what Daisy thinks of this. I think, in terms of books that are turned into films, we're always quick to say the things that we wish were in there or hadn't been done, blah, blah, blah. But Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, there is a scene in one of those, part 1 or 2, that is my favourite scene of all time for an addition. It's not in the book.
Oh, how interesting.
And in the film, there is this moment where, obviously, you've got Harry, Ron and Hermione, and they've been going through all these trials and tribulations together for years. They're in a very fraught position. They're not in Hogwarts. They haven't got the security of anyone else, and they're off trying to destroy the Horcruxes, which embody bits of Voldemort's soul. And Ron has been miserable because carrying around these parts of Voldemort's soul takes a toll on you. You can't destroy it, so it's basically poisoning you. Very much like, the ring in Lord of the Rings. Yeah. Same thing. So we're at that pivotal moment. He's been carrying it. It's souring his thoughts. He storms off. He leaves them. But the moment that he leaves, because of the enchantments around them, they know and he knows, if you make that step, we are impossible to find. Because they're concealed. And he makes the step anyway. Now, as soon as he's gone and he's away from the power, he's obviously devastated, but they can't know. And that's it. He's gone. He's gone from them, and he will not be able to find them by choice, and they can't go to him. So it's this really, really high emotion moment between these three friends who, for these 7 books have been close, and this is quite, you don't know if he's going to die, blah, blah, blah. But what happens immediately after is Harry and Hermione, they're both very upset, and she's been crying and they don't speak for ages, but they're confined together in this tent. It's a big one. And then this song comes on the radio because they're constantly tuning into the radio to see if they can hear messages from people. And this is how people have been communicating, secretly. It's like pirate radio type thing. And Nick Cave's Oh Children comes on.
Oh gosh, yes.
This beautiful, moody song in this really dark tent. And he, sickly, pale, moody, miserable-looking Harry, puts his arm out to Hermione, who's just got these tear-stained cheeks. And they just hold each other and dance to this song.
Oh, how lovely.
And it is this beautiful moment of intimacy between friends, which you rarely see cast between male and female characters that don't have any kind of romantic interest at any point. And it is not in the book, and it's one of my favourite moments, and it's a great song anyway. And it's something I love about the adaptation, because I thought the thing that makes children love Harry Potter so much, apart from all the magic, is it does really highlight how friendship just means everything to you when you're young.
Yes.
It's yours.
Yes.
So little is yours when you're young, and so much is dictated to you. And then you choose these friendships
Yes.
at the backdrop of home being controlled, school being controlled, and then you find this little bit of freedom in the people you connect with.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I think so. I think it does it really well. Anyway, I digress.
That's what this is for.
Yes,
That's what
it is.
podcasts are for, Kelly.
But
Not to digress.
the point of this is that in this book, so we're right at the end, The Deathly Hallows is the final book. Hedwig has been there from the start. She is his introduction to the wizarding world. And when the others all go home for the holidays, he knows he's going to be confined to this aunt and uncle's house. And they pretend that he's not part of a magical community. So he knows he will not have much contact. He won't be allowed out. And he always has Hedwig with him. And he really misses her if she has to go out hunting or if she goes out to take messages. He gets really lonely. So she's always been there. And then right in the last book, when there's this moment, I think the chapter's called The Seven Harrys. And it starts off, it's quite funny because they're all these different characters, girls, boys, stood around, old, young. You've got Hagrid, massive Robbie Coltrane made to look huge. And they all take this polyjuice potion, which if you can turn into the other person if you've used a piece of their hair, say. And everyone in the room becomes Harry. They're the right height, they've got the right scar, they all dress identically. Now, the whole point of this is it's a ruse because they know that Voldemort knows where Harry is. He's going to send people to attack them. So they all say, right, we're all Harry. We're all going to become Harry. He's obviously distraught. No, because you'll all be in danger. And they're like, no, we choose this. Always in fantasy, the choice, it is our choice to be in danger because of we believe in this. And they all depart at the same time. So the plan is they will all leave exactly the same time on their brooms or their various things to leave and hope that it gives him a better chance to leave. Harry leaves with Hedwig in his cage and they are all pursued in the sky and it's dark and there is loads of noise. It's a very sensory, overwhelming description of the chaos. There's people screaming spells, Harry screaming spells. And then Hedwig, the cage goes to fall and he grabs the cage. He's desperate. He stops doing other spells to grab the cage. And just as he thinks he's got the cage, a green light flashes and Hedwig just drops to the bottom of the cage and is dead. Gosh. And people just do not get over it. The death of Hedwig is seen as a real betrayal. And J.K. Rowling says it's the end of his innocence. That is the moment at which he is definitively alone.
Represents.
Yes.
But owls have always represented different things. As I said, Athene in the ancient world, the goddess, owls were part of her being as well, so I think what Rowling's doing, like George Martin in George R.R. Martin in Game of Thrones, I think they're using both history, culture and natural history and mythology, and I don't mind that. I think that's fine. I think
me too.
We can get a bit worked up about, it's like, nature writers always being accused of anthropomorphism, but we're all anthropomorphic because we all want to have this relationship with nature. And there is a danger with it, of course, but as long as you're aware of that danger. When I write about birds, I often describe them as if, like most nature writers do actually, as if they have certain human characteristics. I then look at whether they do have those characteristics and what that means. I suppose because I'm not a scientist, I come from a art and literary background, if you like, and I'm fascinated by science, and I include them in the books, and there's a lot in the book about what makes an owl in the owl biography. The first chapter is an introduction to owls, and the second chapter is what is an owl, because are they different from all other birds? Well, other birds are nocturnal, birds like nightjars, of course, other whole families like that, and certainly lots of individual birds are very nocturnal, nightingales, for example. But owls, I think owls are special. I think they have a quality, and that's probably why J.K. Rowling picked, and not just picked an owl, she picked the most obvious owl. There was a real worry when she did that people would get pet owls.
Yeah, I read this in your book.
And I think, from what I remember, I haven't read the book since I wrote it. I don't reread my books very often. I'm pretty certain that there wasn't really a massive surge in them. Whereas, funny enough, with you're too young to remember.
No, I do.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Do you know why I remember? I live near something called Roath Park.
Yes, and there are terrapins in there.
Full of terrapins.
Yeah.
Exactly because
Lonsdale
of people
Road,
buying them.
Used to be my birding patch in London. It was my first patch in the 90s in West London. I saw a terrapin one day. Yeah, they were released. I had pet terrapins long before, back in the 70s, long before Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And they got so big that my mother looked around to find out how she could get rid of them, and very sensibly didn't release them into the wild.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
What she did do, she took them to Birdseye, who had their factory down the road from us.
I was going to say, do you mean
Birdseye make fish fingers, but genuinely
no.
Birdseye had a tank, a big tank, with a lot of terrapins in, and you could give them to them.
I was really afraid of what you were going to say.
It's a good story, isn't it? But yeah, so the strange thing about owls, I think because it would be very hard to buy an owl. It's not easy.
Yeah.
There are licenses. I think, you have to. I mean, there probably is a black market somewhere, but the good news is that it didn't affect that. Snowy owls, as you said, I mean, the serious point is snowy owls are in trouble mainly because of the climate crisis, because, as you know, the Arctic, the poles generally, but the Arctic in particular, are warming up at a ridiculously high rate. Some of the temperature records in Canada and Alaska this year were 20 degrees Celsius higher than before. That is insane.
No, it's an unimaginable change.
And snowy owls are pretty adaptable. They didn't evolve in the Arctic. They evolved not as big white owls, their ancestors, and they moved into the Arctic because it's if you breed in the Arctic, there's an awful lot of food in summer and not many competitors. No other owls breed up there. There's some other raptors.
Yeah.
So, that's the reason birds live in these extreme... Well, they're not really extreme environments in summer. A lot of the Arctic is it's fine, and there's lots of food and there's lots of daylight. But obviously they evolved the white plumage for camouflage. They don't have many predators, but really human beings and, as you said earlier, vehicles, even in the Arctic, or certainly in places like Canada and Alaska...
Yeah.
Vehicles, pylons, telegraph wires, whatever, they're all bad for a bird like the snowy owl.
Now, in your book, which I have really, really enjoyed, and I would encourage listeners to check out, is one of the series, as you mentioned, the biographies. So this is The Owl, the biography. Or Owls?
No, The Owl.
The Owl. It is The Owl,
I
isn't
did
it?
say, shouldn't we call it Owls? And they said, no, let's keep it as it is.
Yeah.
It's The Owl, a biography.
So that the collection will have... Yeah, fine. I can't resist asking you about this because I was reading the chapter on snowy owls on the train, and I actually did laugh out loud, which I don't enjoy doing when it's on a busy train on a Saturday. But I really, really enjoyed your description of a gentleman called Bobby.
Oh, Bobby Tulloch,
Yeah, and I particularly enjoyed your anecdote about how it was that Bobby, who was, really careful about trying not to intrude too much on the snowy owl's territory and respectful and considerate, what did he have to do to try and get photos of the snowy owl?
Well, it was Bobby and his friend Dennis Coots, who is, I think, still Shetland's main bird photographer. Bobby was a lovely character. He was a lovely man, and I'd met him before. And Bobby became one of the most famous bird watchers, ornithologists, conservationists in Britain, because in 1967 he was wandering across the island of Fetla with a group of visitors, and he saw the snowy owls that had been there a while. There'd been a pair there, and he thought the male was behaving a bit oddly and seeming very territorial, so he wandered up to take a look and found a nest with 3 eggs in. It was the first time snowy owls had ever been recorded breeding in Britain. They may have done so in the 18th century, 19th century, but it was the first record. And snowy owls were this absolute iconic bird. the news was eventually put out, but as you said, they had to watch it. What they did is they watched the nest. There were egg collectors, there were people who might shoot them.
Yeah.
So they watched the nest. But then he and Dennis wanted to get a photograph. Now, this is long before the days of digital photography. This is back in the late 60s. So they believe they built hides around, and that was fine. But to get much closer to the owls without disturbing them, they put on a sort of pantomime horse costume. Is that right?
Yeah.
I think it's right.
I can't believe it.
Yeah. And Bobby, he was a very modest man, but yeah, and they got great photographs, and he became a bit of a legend, really. This was a very strange time. We actually had not global cooling, we had regional cooling of the weather systems in Scotland, Scandinavia, and it drove a lot of Arctic birds down to Britain, and most of them, like the snowy owl, stayed a few years, and then as things warmed up, they went back.
Okay.
But a few did stay. But yeah, the snowy owl was definitely the most famous of these birds, and it ended up being in the newspapers. This wasn't just for birdwatchers or naturalists. It became a massive story.
Yeah, I just love the idea of them putting on a pantomime horse outfit. And also, like you said, you've got to imagine the kit and what they would have been carrying at the time and the expense of that kit. And the idea that they are in a pantomime horse outfit, which, sure, lots of room, but it could not have been easy to navigate.
It's quite hard to believe, isn't it? But it's a lovely story. So I like telling human stories in my books, and that was a particularly nice one to be able to tell.
In terms of familiars, now I am assuming that if you were to have a familiar, if you believed in them, you would have a bird.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, and
it's not really a toad, is it?
You know what the obvious question is going to be.
Which one is it?
Yes.
I now have 3 favourite birds. I'm going to cheat. My favourite birds, but I'm going to tell you at the end, which is the familiar.
Okay.
For 45 years, when I lived in London and then Cambridge and then back in London again for most of my life, the swift was my favourite bird, because swifts turn up at the beginning of May, end of April nowadays, but beginning of May in those days. And they are the sign, they're basically the sign, if you live in London, that you've missed spring.
Yeah.
And summer is on its way. So they scream through the sky. Extraordinary birds. I moved to Somerset 17 years ago now, and I was taking my kids out after a couple of years, and you don't see swifts around here very much. They don't nest over my village because they're a more urban creature. And I saw a swallow flying past, the first swallow of the spring. It was April the 6th, 2008 or 9, I think. And I started getting tears in my eyes because the swallow had come back. Now, when I lived in London, swallows meant nothing. They're not an urban bird. Then I wrote my book, 10 Birds That Changed the World. I wrote the book on the swallow, and swallow, I think, has become my favourite bird. But now the raven is coming up on the outside. Mm-hmm. And I think if I had to have a familiar, it would have to be a raven, because swallows are not very practical. You can't keep them for half the year because they have to fly to Africa and back, so you wouldn't see them, and they don't live very long. But ravens, of course, the ones in the tower, which I went to visit when I wrote my book. But the raven is the most extraordinary bird. It's probably the most intelligent bird. And I'll leave you with one anecdote about this. I was down on my coastal birdwatching patch, which I go to most weekends, about 3 or 4 years ago, and I saw a raven, which when I first moved to Somerset, there were no ravens here. They gradually, they came back pretty quickly, and I have them over the garden now. But I saw this raven, which is always lovely to see a raven, and it was flying past, and it wasn't calling. They often call, but it was on its own. It was flying directly past me, quite close. So I looked up and I went, "Oh!" And it turned its head to me. It didn't beat. Wing beats carried on normal. It just turned its head and just went, "Ah, ah." And I thought, what I thought about that bird was, I think ravens, and I talk about this in that book, that ravens are equal to us. They're not subservient to us like pigeons are, and they're not superior. They're just there being ravens. And I think Game of Thrones actually shows this. They are extraordinary characters, and I think if I had to have a bird that followed me around, and I had I don't know that I have temperamentally. I don't think I'm very like a raven. But,
No.
But you know, ravens are intelligent. They're playful. They're funny. They do another thing. They'll fly along. I saw this a few years ago. You see it sometimes in spring. They're flying along, and they just turn their body entirely upside down as they fly. So they're flying upside down.
Why?
And then back. Aha! Well, people say, of course, they're courting. But there's no other birds around. They're flying straight.
That's so bizarre.
They're not flying around. They're not with a mate, which they do. Ravens do court and they do that sort of thing.
For sheer amusement?
I think they just because they like a laugh.
Oh, I love that.
And
a bird with a sense of humour.
A man called Bernd Heinrich, who studied ravens more than anyone, he's a scientist in America. He said that when they slide down snow slopes, they're playing. Yeah, little girl.
Good girl.
I have my familiar. Look, I've got a dog.
Yeah.
That'll do.
I like the fact that some people, when you ask questions like that, they will just pick the thing they like. But you did what I did, which is I worry about the reality of it. So
yes,
I was thinking about how much I would really like a tiny, tiny bird. I like the idea of a bird that could be in my pocket if it, nestled up, or it could sit on your shoulder and it wouldn't be hurting you with talons. And then I started thinking about life expectancy, and I ruined all my own enjoyment. And I noticed that you actually talked about how long things live. What tiny bird has a surprisingly long lifespan, if any?
Seabirds, small seabirds like petrels, live for 30 or 40 years, even though they're very small. Generally, bigger. You're right. Generally, bigger birds live longer. Mm-hmm. The birds that live longest are parrots. Obviously, particularly in captivity, they can live 80, 90 years. But in the wild, they live a long time. But seabirds live an extraordinarily long time. All seabirds, and it may well be because they don't really have many hazards in life. You think, the sea, it's really dangerous. Not if you're a seabird. No. So birds like the storm petrel, which is barely bigger than a house martin, the trouble is you'd have to be feeding it fish all the time.
Yeah.
If you want an affectionate bird, the bullfinch, I've been told.
I love them.
Yeah, well, they're beautiful birds, but I've been told that they're also incredibly affectionate. People keep them as pets. Finches are kept as pets because practically you feed them seeds, so they're fine. They're reasonably easy to keep. Starlings are very affectionate, but they poo everywhere.
Oh, that would definitely put me off.
Yeah, so,
Okay. Thank you for being my guest today. I have really, really enjoyed your company. Last thing to ask you. Do you think a snowy owl was the right choice for a film and book series that was only really going to spotlight one type of bird? Do you think a snowy owl was a great choice?
Yes, I think owls are charismatic, they're mysterious, they've got that human quality, and if you're going to pick an owl, snowy owl's pretty top of the list, isn't it, really?
Is it top of the list for you?
For owls, I think it's pretty close. I mean, I've seen Pell's fishing owl in Africa, which is amazing. I haven't seen Blackiston's fish owl in Japan.
Okay.
Which is huge. I've seen eagle owls. But yeah, if I wanted to see an owl again that I've already seen, snowy owl would be the one. So yeah, good choice. And thank you very much for inviting me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for letting me share Rosie, who's now affectionately cuddled up on my lap.
Elliott explains. I think Hedwig or a snowy owl like him would be a great companion because they are hunters, so they might be able to catch some tea for you, like a bit of chicken. Owls' heads can turn 360 degrees, so if I had a snowy owl, I would definitely train it to hoot when someone was burgling. Since they can fly silently, I'd use it to give my friends a good surprise. And I think he's a good companion for Harry Potter because he's very loyal. He can deliver secret mail because that's what owls do back then. He's very cute and possibly a bit cuddly.
And that was my fairy godson, Elliott Yates. Thank you for your invaluable contribution there, Elliott. He is indeed going to be ending every episode of Bird Brain with his own opinion on the bird in question, or the character, or both. It's a mystery. Thank you also to Stephen Moss, my most exceptional guest, for all of his knowledge and his generosity with his time. And finally, thank you, dear listener, for making it through my entire podcast. I hope to see you again for episode 2 of Bird Brain.